everybody, welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. Today I am out back because it's beautiful, even though it's so early in the year. Spring has come early, so I'm super excited. This is my favorite time of year. Well, anything warm is my favorite time of year. Enough about me. This is Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. That is me, and I'm doing 365 days of Bible reading. We're reading through the Bible chronologically from start to finish using the One Year Chronological Bible plan. If you have never been here before, you're going to go to the One Year Chronological Bible online.com and you're going to download their reading plan. It is a free reading plan. You use your own Bible and it just goes day to day. And so today we're on day 76, which if you're downloading this Bible reading plan for the very first time, it will be March 16th. So if you want to make it easier for you to be able to find it. And we're doing Deuteronomy 13 through 17. So obviously we're in the middle of Deuteronomy, which is Moses reiterating all of the things that God has said to him from the mountain, from the tabernacle, while they were in the wilderness and all of those things. So if this is your first day, listen, awesome, and then go back to the very beginning, Genesis 1, and build that foundation up so you can understand where we are and how this makes sense in the big picture. Now, if you've read your Bible before and you've been in Deuteronomy, then this might be a good place for you to start, just to kind of get invested in to see whether any of this makes sense or not. So I just like to give my thoughts. I like to share with you some of the things that I've seen. And of course, always when I start, I try and go back to go forward so you know a little bit of where we are and why it matters. So right now we are with Moses. Moses is the leader of the Israelites. The Israelites are Jacob's sons. So they are the tribes that create the entire people group of the Israelites, which are these people that God has taken out of Egypt and he has lifted them up out of Egypt. They were in slavery for hundreds of years. He has moved them into what's considered the land of milk and honey, which is now Israel, which was then called Canaan. And he has set them apart and he has given them ways so that God can live in their midst and they are a holy people. There's a lot in here. So and he wants them to know it, to memorize it, to understand it, and to live it. This isn't just something that these people can go, oh yeah, that's a rule and I can abide by it or not abide by it. That's not the case for the Israelite people. God has made it very clear. Of course, there's construction going on as soon as I start. God has made it very clear to these people that he wants them to follow the rules. And some of the things that we have seen showing how clear he has made it is like, for example, Aaron's son. So Aaron is Moses' brother. He was a priest, a high priest in the tabernacle. And he was in the Ark of the Covenant, and then his sons came in and they lit these censers, which if you've ever seen a censer, it is, you might want to look up a picture, but you've probably seen them in current churches, but more like I don't want to say fundamental, but more of an Orthodox church where they're hanging from a string. It's like a ball sort of, and it's got incense in it and the incense rises up out of it. And so they lit these censers when they weren't supposed to. And so he killed both of them immediately, right? So things were happening very quickly. He killed Moses and Aaron, not Moses yet, but their death, they were going to die. God took both of their lives before they arrived in the land of Canaan because they did not speak to the people of God's holiness in all these things. So in some of the things in particular, they didn't speak to God of holy. So he metes out punishment sort of quickly. Justice is relatively quick in this people group, so that again, so they can they need to be holy, they need to remain holy. And yesterday, I think it was, or maybe a couple of days ago, we started one of the things that Moses noted through God, was that he was trying to humble them in the woods to see who was going to follow, right, and then who wasn't going to follow the Lord. And so the Lord's asking a lot of these people, the things that they were doing, he's taking those things away. He's saying, and we're going to see some of them today, he's saying, these animals are clean, these animals aren't clean. This is what you need to do with a dead body. This is what you need to sacrifice. This is what, so he's giving them all of these things, probably a lot of them that they were doing before they came and were with God. And so he's pulling them away from what he considers wicked practices, and he's bringing them in to be holier and to be with God. So That's a little bit of an overview. I'm hoping that you got the gist of what it is. Right now, they are getting ready to go as a people group. Remember, we're like 1.5 million people, something around that area. And they're all getting ready to go into the land of Canaan and take up that land and remove the people that are in it. They're getting rid of those people because the Lord said they were wicked and he was done with them. And he's lifting up the Israelites and he's putting the Israelites in that land because the people before did not follow him. They did not honor him as God. Moses is now reminding all of the people, this is the next generation of people, and he's reminding all of these people why they are doing this, right? Remember that God took you out of the land of Exodus. Remember that God gave you these laws. Remember that God saved you from slavery, right? And so he's reminding them of the good that God did. And then because of the good that God did, there are things that God wants you to do to honor him. And it's in some ways, to be really quite honest with you, it's the least that we can do in order to honor the God that saved us. So when it looks like it's too hard, when it looks like you just can't make it through, when it looks like what he asks of you seems really unfair, when the world tells you that he's awful and mean, and if he actually exists at all he does is want to kill people, or he wants you to kill people, we can look to this and be reminded of all the good that he does do, all the worthiness that he deserves, for us to be praising him because of all that he does do. He dropped food from heaven, and their clothes didn't wear out. So he's done some pretty extraordinary things with people who have been not deserving of it. So all the way back in the garden, they disobeyed the one thing that he asked them to do. So we are broken people, and now he is reiterating some of the things that he's already discussed, but there's just a couple extra things in there that I want to note, but not too many today. Today is a lot of repetitive stuff. So again, it's Deuteronomy 13 through 16, 17. Today is day 76. And so I'm going to start in verse 1. And it says, if a prophet, so one who foretells the future, right? So it goes right into what a prophet would be. One who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a sign or a wonder. And if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and then the prophet says, so to break this down a little bit, so say somebody comes and somebody does something extraordinary. They bring somebody to life. They miraculously, they provide food. They heal someone, right? There's a lot of healings. I even think now there are a lot of healings that happen. So if they do these things, and then they tell you, turn away from God, because either I'm the one who did these healings, or there's another God that did these healings, or whatever it is, those people are not people who honor God, and those people need to be put to death. Now, again, I want to reiterate to you, this is the Israelites. This does not mean today, right? So if someone goes, well, why don't you do today what you did then? We will get to that in about 6 months. That has a whole new set of circumstances and situations. This was very clearly with the Israelites. If someone is living in Israel and they perform some miraculous thing, and then they try and steer you away from the God that they're following, the God that created the universe, to a different God of any kind, then they are to be put to death. Not because they did a healing, not because they are a diviner by dreams, but because they are steering you away from God, the one true God, the God that saves, the God that brought them out of Egypt. That's why they keep being reminded. Remember, this generation may have been young, but this generation saw it with their own eyes. You remember when you were back in Egypt, and you remember what I did for you, right? So those are the people who need to remember, and then they need to teach everybody else. So if they're trying to steer them away from that God to a different one who has not done any of those things for them, then they are to be put to death because they're turning people away from God. All right, so I want to go to read verse 6. The wind keeps, can you guys hear? I hope you can hear the wind chimes. They're like my background music. Verse 6 says, if your very own brother or your son or daughter or the wife you love or your closest friend secretly entices you, saying, let us go and worship other gods, gods that neither you nor your ancestors have known, gods of the people around you, whether near or far, from one end of the land to the other. Do not yield to them or listen to them. Here we go. Show them no pity. So it's not even just not listening. Show them no pity and don't spare or shield them. You must certainly put them to death. You've got to get rid of this. You've got to get this out of your land. It spreads like a cancer. And so once one person forgets, then another starts to forget. And then another, right? And then you've got 2 people spreading this cancer. And then you've got 4 people spreading this cancer. And so they're immediately squashing this and making sure my mic is on. They're squashing this and making sure that you immediately get this out of the get it out of Israel, so you're not a part of it, and so it can't spread. So you remain holy, right? This is all about remaining holy. This is all about remaining with God. All right, I want to go to verse 9. This is another, I thought, interesting verse. Oh, it says you must certainly put them to death. Your hand must be your hand. Your hand must be the first in putting them to death, and then the hands of all the people. Stone them to death, because they try to turn you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt. Here's your reminder, out of the land of slavery. So they're not doing it just because you're a jerk. They're doing it because they're trying to turn you away from the God who saved you out of Egypt. All right. So I want to go to verse 12. If you hear about it said in one of the towns your Lord God is giving you to live, that the troublemakers have arisen among you and have led people out of. Let me start that again. Sorry, that was terrible reading. If you hear it said about one of the towns the Lord your God is giving you to live in, so this is somewhere in Israel, that troublemakers have arisen among you and have led the people out of their town astray, saying, let us go and worship other gods you've not known, then you must inquire, probe, and investigate it thoroughly. If it's true, right? So you got to probe it first, but then if it's true, you've got to plunder. So if it's true, so you have this little town in Egypt. So you got to go and figure out, okay, so there's a whole bunch of troublemakers. They're starting a ruckus. They're turning everybody away from God. You go in this town, you investigate, you find out it's true. You're going to go into this town. You're going to kill everyone in this town. You're going to plunder and the animals, by the way, so including the livestock. So again, we're ridding the town of this cancer. And then you got to plunder all their stuff, bring all their stuff into town, and then burn it all. And then that town is no longer to exist. So this, talk about supreme justice in this situation. This is an extreme version of punishment, and it is to keep people from turning people to God. And I guess I'm kind of reiterating this idea over and over and over again, that God does not want you to turn away from him. Turning away from him is death. And he's not punishing them because he's a bratty God that wants everyone to give him money. He's punishing them because turning you away from God is leading to death. And you are the people, these Israelites, you are the people that the Messiah is going to come through, and that's going to save the entire world. Right? So this is bigger than just being about you or feeling offended that that the punishment feels too harsh, right? He's creating a way for the entire world to be saved and to live with him for eternity, right? To live in blessings and splendor and milk and honey and no poor and no one not eating and right, nobody dying. And you're saying, I shouldn't say you because maybe, but it feels harsh, right? It feels harsh to me. But the truth is it's because he wants good for us. And so he wants us to be together for eternity. And so what we have to do is we have to stay on the true path of what eternity looks like, and sort of I keep thinking of like a vine and like kind of killing the dead weeds off of the vine, right? In order for the vine to flourish, we have to sort of cleanse it and get rid of what is making it not flourish. And so while we can look and see that probably seems reasonable when it comes to planting, when it comes to human life, that is a really difficult thing to hear and to understand. But again, it's always about following the God that you really know and remembering that it is for our good. It is actually not for the bad of the world as a whole. So looking at big picture. All right, moving on to Deuteronomy 14. So going to 1, your children of the Lord, your God, do not cut or shave the front of your heads for the dead. So This section and a little bit in this section is that, and it also then we go to eating. This is about keeping yourself holy, obviously inwardly, but also outwardly. And it seems some of these practices were done through for other gods, and so it is not to be done for this God, right? This God is to be worshipped differently. So I feel like anytime you see something arise that um, might not fully make sense, like why would shaving your head matter? Who cares, right? There's an understanding that some of these practices were being done in order to bless and honor other gods, and so he's pulling them away from doing that and doing something different. And I think that's actually really important too, because I think here we go with understanding historically that some things were done differently, and that's why God says don't do them. That goes all throughout the Old and New Testament. So sometimes other cultures were doing it, and so not to be mixed with that other culture, we need to completely turn away from doing that for a time, uh, recognizing that that culture did that and we no longer do that. Right? So there's a difference between God's people and the rest of the world, people that aren't that don't love God. So uh, moving to, I want to read verse 7. So talking about animals that are clean and unclean. Um, this is another area in which, like he's saying, don't eat pigs, right? Because they have hoofs, but they don't chew the cuds, right? So they, whatever it is that makes them detestable. Again, this is about what he chooses for the Israelites to stay away from instead of eating and participating in. This is all a choice for him. All right, and then going down to verse 22, this is moving on to the giving of the tithes. In verse 22, it says, "Be sure to set aside a tenth of all that your fields produce each year. Eat the tithe of your grain, new wine and olive oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he's going to choose." And then if that's too distant, this is the same thing as we read, I think it was yesterday, where you can kind of eat the meat everywhere, right? So God is in one location. If that's too far, you can eat the meat, but you have to give tithes in this other location. And then I want to move on to, so it's important to give what you have. It's important to give that to God. So he's just reminding them to give that to God. So going to verse 28, it says, "At the end of 3 years, bring all the tithes of that year's produce and store it in your towns. And this is for a purpose. And this is so that the Levites, who have no allotment or here, right? They don't have any land. So the Levites, if you recall, every town, the Levites are the people who move the tabernacle. And so they're eventually the ones that take care of all the holy things. They have no land. And so they can't, they're not raising necessarily animals. They're certainly not growing any grain or any product like that. And so you bring your food and you give it to them, and they eat the part of those tithes. So the Levites and the foreigners and the fatherless, sorry, not the fathers, the fatherless and the widows who live in your towns can come and eat and be satisfied, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work in your hands. So it's not just for the Levites, it's also for anyone who is what we would now call disenfranchised. So anyone who cannot get it on their own. So orphans, widows, right? So uh, slightly different now. Widows don't necessarily need the help of, not necessarily, sometimes they do, but not necessarily. Maybe they worked their entire lives, and so they don't need the help of the town, but sometimes they do. And so in this area, they did. So when they were widows, they didn't have either a husband, or probably if they were widows, they probably also didn't have a father that would be able to take care of them and provide for them. So this was the responsibility of the entire community, was to, sorry, there's a dog barking. This was the responsibility of the entire community to feed those who were unable to feed themselves. And so it's also said to eat and be satisfied. So it's not like they're starving. It's that they are eating and being satisfied. So they are also being provided food and they're not starving to death. All right, moving on to 15. At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel all debts. This one I love because this is a really big heart issue, I think. So they can't hold on to debts. They can't hold on to people, and they can't hold on to debts. So if you take a Hebrew as a slave, they every 7 years they have an opportunity to not be a slave. Now they might choose to be a slave again, but they have an opportunity not to. So not only that, but we can't even hold it. The Israelites can't even hold it in their hearts to not give, because they have to have their debt canceled at one point. So they're to give freely and also cancel the debt freely when the debt needs to be given freely, right? So like there's all these things in place in order to not hold it over anybody else that they have a debt under you. So this is a, you know, an outward thing for sure, but definitely an inward heart issue, because who would want to take a slave knowing that you have to, well, I only have them for a certain amount of time. And the truth is in some periods, they might only have them for a year or 2 years before that 7 year period, because it's not like the 7 year you get them, but it's every 7 years. And so they have a 7 year calendar that they would go through. And so those debts would be canceled. All right. So verse 9 in here, see if I'm this far. The 7th year for canceling debts is near, so you do not show ill will toward the needy, your fellow Israelites, and then they may appeal to the Lord against you if you show them ill will even, and you'll be found guilty of sin. So if you show ill will and you don't cancel that debt, then you can be guilty of sin. Give generously with them. And then it says, be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy among you. All right, moving on to this. I'm going to read verse 15. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. So you're letting these slaves go free because that's what God did for you. So it's always a reminder. The way we're to behave towards others is a reminder of the way God behaved towards us. So if you remember, or I don't remember what day it was, but a couple of days ago when I talked about them going into the land, and he made a very big point to recognize that this was not a land that they earned. This was not a land that they built up any of the food, none of the orchards. They didn't build any of the homes or the cities, right? They didn't provide any of the animals or anything that was provided in there. And so he was reminding them that they came from nothing, and he's giving them everything, right? This was all stuff that they did not deserve. And so this is a consistent, these 7 years. So every 7 years they have to kind of tell themselves, right? I didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve this slave that I have. And so giving him, releasing that debt from him. It's not my money anyway. This is all God's money. Releasing that slave into out of my service and into his own, right? So this is just all a reminder that God did all these things for you. Therefore, you open-handedly do them for everyone else. So when somebody does something to you that you feel is harsh or undeserved, right? You can remind your, and I mean you, not as an Israelite person, but as a person, knowing who God is and knowing why God is doing what he's doing. You as a human, or me as a human, I can say to myself, I don't deserve to have that money that they gave me, or I don't deserve to, or it would, who knows, it could be me that would be poor in this time. So I freely give this person money because I don't deserve what I got, and I got because God chose to give it to me, because God chose to give it to me, right? So it's nothing I did to deserve it. And so everything in my heart says I can give it because it's not about me. And it's not about anything that I did, and it's not about my greatness. That's a hard pill to swallow, even as I say it. So many things I say, I feel like are a hard pill to swallow. All right, I want to move on to 16. So moving on to this last chapter that we got going on here, and this is starting to talk about all the festivals. So starting out with Passover, and this is a reminder. He's done this reminder a few times. It's a reminder every year that they have these celebrations all the time, and I feel like a lot of these are really joyful. So it's a reminder not just to remember the God that did this, right, but to be joyful that he gave you all of this, and to be thankful that God is really good. And even though we see some of this bad stuff around us, God is so good, and he does this. The one thing that I want to note is in verse 15, I think it's 15. No, that's in 5. In verse 5 over here. No, 16 verse 5. It says, you must not sacrifice the Passover in any town the Lord your God gives you, except the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. There you must sacrifice the Passover in the evening when the sun goes down on the anniversary of your departure. So you go there and you roast it and you eat it. And then we go to the Festival of Weeks. Again, verse 12, it says, remembering that you were slaves in Egypt. So you follow carefully these decrees. And then in verse 9 through 9, is it verse 9? 9, it says, count off 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. Celebrate the festival of weeks to the Lord your God by giving a free will offering in proportion to the blessings the Lord your God has given you. So you give your free will in the order. So no matter what God has given you, you give a blessing for the amount that God has given you. All right, and then it says, your sons and daughters, your males and female servants, the Levites in your town, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows living among you, because you rejoice because of this dwelling for your name. So remember again that you were slaves in Egypt. And then on the Feast of the Tabernacles, it's the same thing. They bring a gift in proportion to the way that the Lord has blessed you. So these are joyful parties to remind you that you are blessed, to remind you that you have been given stuff. So I feel like this one ends on a good note today. You've been given wonderful things. You've been given a lot of blessings. And so in that, you can rejoice and you can willfully, freely give to the Lord because he has given so much to you. That's how we're ending it today. So, again, just a lot of reminders about what they're doing and why they're doing it. If this has been a blessing to you, so if you have enjoyed this podcast, it's been a blessing to you. I want you to like it, hit the like button. I want you to subscribe to the channel, and I want you to share it with people. Share your reading with people. Go back and read from the beginning and get your base and your grounding on who God is. And then check me out tomorrow. I'll be doing the same thing, but the next day. So keep reading, and I'll see you next time.